Welcome to the Strong, Single and Human podcast, a real look at single parenting, how to navigate the ups and downs of life with kids on your own while keeping sane. We cover all manner of subjects from domestic violence, dealing with childhood trauma, through to fussy eaters and how to help your kids become resilient. I'm your host, Claire Martin. Welcome. Jay Rosenthal is an entrepreneur and child welfare consultant with a diverse background in various areas of social work. With prior experience in conducting child welfare investigations, Jay has developed a comprehensive understanding of child protection systems and protocols, and additionally, his expertise extends to therapy, specifically in children congregate care settings, where he has worked closely with children in a group care environment. Jay holds a bachelor's degree in psychology from the Derner Institute of Advanced Psychological Studies at Adelphi University. This academic foundation has equipped him with a deep understanding of human behaviour and psychological principles, which he can apply in his work as a child welfare consultant. Jay's dedication to advocating for vulnerable populations is evident through his involvement as a member of the founding board of directors of a not-for-profit organisation established in May 2014. This organisation focuses specifically on championing the rights of children with rare or undiagnosed diseases and their families. Jay aims to create awareness, provide support and drive positive changes in the lives of these children and their families. This is the Strong, Single and Human podcast. Hi, Jay Rosenthal. Thanks for joining the podcast.
Happy to be here, Claire.
I love it. Now, it's a bit of a delicate subject that we're going to talk about today, but I think it definitely needs to be talked about. I'm speaking to you, you're in the States, so I think it's even more of a delicate subject over in the US. But first of all, let's discuss and talk about who you are and why you do the things you do nowadays.
Okay, well, as you said, my name is Jay. I am a child welfare consultant and former Child Protective Services investigator.
I have to say, that all sounds very scary, Jay. Before you even start, that all sounds very scary and very official. But carry on. I interrupted you.
Oh, it always is. But yeah, I am also the founder of CPS Protect Consulting Services, which is a first of its kind consulting firm helping families prepare for and navigate Child Protective Services cases. We serve the entire United States. I have bigger ambitions for it, certainly to go further.
You're going to go global, aren't you? Go global.
We're going to try at some point. First, we have to actually get our footing in the United States.
Yes.
But we are on our way.
Yes.
It is not particularly easy when the government basically owns child welfare, meaning anything child welfare related is at least today, the government's charge. That wasn't always the case. Actually, that's relatively recent. You're not talking until the 1960s and 1980s. Actually, most child protection today actually takes its inspiration from the United States back to one case in 1874. There was a 10-year-old girl named Mary Ellen Wilson who, shortly after she was born, her father died, her mother worked, left her with a boarder, a babysitter. She got behind on payments, and Mary Ellen ended up with the government, and all it took was some misfiled paperwork for Mary Ellen to be placed elsewhere with another family. It was a couple. Ironically, the husband died again, and the mother was very upset, was very abusive. The government didn't know what to do. Nobody knew what to do. The founder of the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, a man named Henry Berg, was approached to help. And just let it sink in for a second that there was a Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals before there was one for prevention of cruelty to children. Talk about irony.
That's nuts.
They worked out a way to actually rescue Mary Ellen. His chief legal counsel, a man named, oh God, what was his name? I'm actually losing it here.
I think you're doing very well. I wouldn't have remembered all of this.
Elbridge Gerry. This is not my first time telling this story. Well. He posed as a census worker to observe Mary Ellen, and in 1874 brought the case before the criminal court and managed to use a law that's often the first taught in. It's the first thing you learn in law schools in the U.S. They used habeas corpus. They filed a habeas corpus petition and got Mary Ellen to testify.
Wow.
Her alleged foster mother, adoptive mother, they didn't really have a term for it at the time, yes, was convicted of brutal child abuse. Mary Ellen did go on to be adopted by some wonderful people. She lived a full life, raised her own family. It was a success story, and out of that grew various societies for the prevention of cruelty to children. In the 1960s, the government started getting its hands in things a little bit more, and by the 1980s, it looked today like it does in the United States. But the inspiration for modern child protection in the Western world really stems from the progression in the United States to the government monstrosity it is today. So while in the UK and Canada and Australia, it's not identical to the US, the general framework comes from the US. So unfortunately, you can give us the blame there.
Well, unfortunately or fortunately, right?
Various imperfections.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing, right? There are imperfections in it, and we'll talk about some of those later. But like, at least, like you said, I can't believe there was a prevention for the cruelty of animals, but not for children, not for human beings. Like, it's almost like we thought we're not cruel to human beings, but we are. If we can be cruel to animals, we definitely can be cruel to ourselves.
Yeah, the first Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children came around in 1875, rising out of the Mary Ellen case. But it wasn't until around the 1960s the government started getting a lot more involved. Child protection moved from the criminal court to the family court as we know it today.
Yeah.
And unfortunately today it is a huge mess, a nightmare, and there's no shortage of horror stories that arise.
And we need to get it sorted, don't we? We really got to get it sorted. But how did you get involved in all of this?
So I was a CPS investigator. Before that, I had held a number of positions in social services. But I decided to, well, you know what? Maybe I could help some families in crisis. Keep in mind, this is a much more naive version of me. So forgive that version of me for being naive.
No, but it was a positive naivety, right? You just wanted to help people and help kids who were going through struggling time, like traumatic times.
Well, they say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So I started working for my local CPS agency, and very quickly I realized that working for the government is not like working for the private sector. It is, there's a lot more of a focus on liability. It is a lot more about how well liked are you. When it comes to getting my driver's license renewed, the same layers of bureaucracy and incompetence and redundancy, existed in child welfare. There's this idea that allegedly, because of the subject matter of what child welfare deals with, that somehow the government does a better job with child welfare than it does with your taxes.
Wow. And that's not the case.
No, the culture is really the same, even though the subject matter is different. I remember my first day on the job, I said the worst thing I could possibly say. And it was, I'm not here to make friends, I'm here to do my job.
Wow.
It's why I describe myself as I was a good civil servant. I was a great employee and a terrible civil servant.
Yeah.
I was not good at playing by the unspoken rules of working for the government. I was a great employee and I did the right thing, but I was not good at those unspoken rules of quid pro quo and
politics, basically, is what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Politics.
Absolutely. I remember dealing with a case and they wanted to, supposedly domestic violence counseling was what the mother needed because she was involved with this guy who was really, his rap sheet was longer than I am tall. And yes, I am a short 5'7" Jewish man, but still, that's a pretty long rap sheet.
I was going to say 5'7". That's not short, but yeah.
There were real serious issues, and mom kept seeing this guy, and the kid was actually witnessing mom getting beaten
up.
But I had referred her to what's called a CBO, a community-based organization, instead of a child welfare contractor through what we in the United States call prevention services, which are services that are funded and paid for by the government, usually contracted out to a nonprofit agency that that's supposed to prevent removal of a child and placement into foster care. Now, it's not really as good as it sounds, but because I got a lot of flack from my superiors because I referred to a community-based organization. That's anything that's really outside, that's not paid for by the government directly, under the Family First Prevention Services Act. And I got a lot of flack for that. And I'm like, it's not like I referred her to a bad DV counselor. So what's the problem? And I started going down the rabbit hole and I started seeing some of the issues. Well, if it's funded by the government and it's contracted out through CPS, well, then CPS sets the terms as to how that works. And if, usually prevention services are provided in home. So something didn't sit right. And after a while, I noticed with the bureaucracy, it's like, okay, it is really difficult to actually help families here. And if I'm not making seven figures and I'm not helping families, then what exactly am I doing here? And so I was left with three choices because I found child welfare to be my calling. I love to be able to get a concern, knock on somebody's door. And, and unfortunately nobody was ever happy to see me because let's be honest, merely by knocking on somebody's door and flashing your badge, basically what you're saying is, hi, someone told the government that you're a bad parent and I'm here to find out why. May I come in? No parent is going to react well to that. No parent. So, but it was all about, okay, how do you find the reason why this family wants to work with you, other than if you don't, I'll take you to court. Because here's the dirty little secret about actually about what it takes to actually resolve a serious situation. If I threaten you and say that if you don't comply with me, if you don't do what I say, then I'm going to take you to court and I might take away your kids, then you're going to comply with me. But as soon as the threat is no longer, as soon as the threat goes away, as soon as it no longer exists, you're going to go right back to the status quo. You're not going to change anything. No. The only way that change actually sticks is if you want to change, if you want to change the circumstances. And so just strong arming somebody and assuming that's going to stick forever is silly. So I loved what I did because I actually made the effort to do the right thing. Unfortunately, that put me at odds with my superiors, but I learned as long as I didn't make them look bad, I could actually get away with doing what I was supposed to do.
But that wasn't making you happy, though, was it? But that wasn't making you happy. You just
absolutely not. So I could either leave my calling forever, I could make the best of a bad situation, and I did that for a while because I always feared, okay, well, what if case X was accepted by one of my colleagues? What happens then?
Yeah.
Or create what I thought was needed, which was truly the most insane option, because it was predicated on the idea that half of all businesses don't go kaput, after the first 5 years, and that people were actually going to trust something like what I had to offer, and that somehow we were going to get enough money to operate solely off cash flow, because it's not like the government was ever going to sanction this. It's not like the government was ever going to say, oh, great idea, you're potentially leveling the playing field and making us do more stuff. We're gonna fund that, we're gonna sanction that. Absolutely not. And that's why the government basically has a monopoly on this, is nothing really is getting off the ground without their green light. So yes, it was an absolutely insane idea that something like this could be done.
So what exactly is it you're doing for people? So what do you do that's different from working for the government and dealing with all of those sort of things?
So what I do is, or my firm, what we do is we help families prepare for and navigate Child Protective Services cases. So through our main offering, what we call Urgent Assist, we can actually, when CPS comes to the home, we can actually be on the phone with you and interact with CPS and you. We know exactly we know exactly what Child Protective Services is looking for. We've done these investigations. We've done these cases over and over and over again, time and again. We've used every trick in the book. I can't say there's been anything that surprised us. I will say there was one thing that did surprise me. There was a CPS investigator that was caught off guard, and I'll never forget the line, "Please let me leave." Nobody was keeping him there. He was just really frustrated that the family wasn't actually asking him to leave. They just weren't answering every question that he had and weren't bucking to empty threats. They were cooperating to the extent that we decided it was in our best interest to cooperate. We work with families in terms of strategizing exactly how to work on their case if they're in court. A lot of times there are court-appointed attorneys, don't have a lot of time, and even the best attorneys don't really have a strong understanding of the child welfare system outside of the courtroom most of the time. So we function as, okay, this is what you can do on the policy side. This is we've been very successful there. When it comes to domestic violence, how do you minimize the chances that child welfare gets involved, and successfully make your exit? There are a lot of families, there are a lot of mothers and even fathers who will stay in an abusive relationship because they're afraid of what will happen if child welfare gets involved. And the truth is, in the United States, I can't speak to other countries, but exoneration from failure to protect in domestic violence, child protective services cases only exists in Alaska, Florida, Kentucky, Michigan, Montana, Nevada, New Jersey, Texas, Washington State, and West Virginia on a conditional basis, and in Wisconsin, Oregon, New Hampshire, and Iowa unconditionally.
So what does that actually mean, though? Does that mean if you fail to protect your child by leaving a domestic violence situation, you could be prosecuted yourself?
Well, let's say you're having a yelling or screaming match with your spouse, and your child is in the home. They might be in another room, but they could potentially be psychologically traumatized for that. And both were, both you and your spouse were yelling, and therefore it doesn't matter who started it. It doesn't matter who hit whom. You're both responsible for possibly traumatizing your child. And so, yes, it could be substantiated, except in limited circumstances in those few states.
Yeah.
And so, basically, child welfare, because of potential liability. If child welfare doesn't act and a child dies, they could get in a lot of trouble. People could lose their jobs. People could. Yeah. So even if there's a small concern, child welfare, child protective services tends to act with a real trigger finger, because then they can say, at least I did something. And if that means a removal and the child goes to foster care, well, foster care is usually handled by a different worker. In the U.S., they typically outsource this to a nonprofit contractor. And the statistics on foster care, the outcomes for kids, it's really saddening. But at least they can say that they made some effort to protect the child from whatever minor concern existed. In fact, 84% of removals in the United States are due to neglect, not abuse. So you're not talking sexual abuse.
And when you say neglect, is that through somebody having to work to provide for the family and therefore leaving the children at home? What does neglect actually cover, right? Because I'm sure neglect in the States covers similar stuff over here in Australia and in the UK and stuff like that.
Oh, that's fun. There's no consistent definition for neglect.
Oh my God.
State has its own allegations.
I'm sure we've got that here.
And what you talk about, in terms of leaving a child alone, lack of supervision or inadequate supervision is really an allegation of hindsight. It's a failure of hindsight, because there is no specific measure for. You can't go by age, and you can't go by specifically by maturity level. It's very difficult to do that. There's no exact science. I mean, some states will say by age, some states will give some rough recommendations. But if your kid is walking in the neighborhood alone, and someone sees that and calls child welfare, and child welfare decides, well, this child could have been abducted, and they were alone for too long because maybe the child is 10 years old, and maybe in that state they don't see that, they see that as a safety concern. Well, guess what? You're in trouble. But this wasn't an issue 20, 30 years ago, so much. Now you have a lot more helicopter parenting, and with the consequences that that come with something like that, how do you actually how can you actually be a parent if anything that you do could actually backfire? And then if it does, it's not that it's not that an accident happened, it's that you were neglectful. And this is what I see so many families, they make this mistake. It's the first mistake they make when Child Protective Services shows up, is I define a good parent and a good home the same way that child welfare does, and all I have to do is show them that I'm a good parent, or that my ex is a terrible person, and they'll understand. And the truth is, that doesn't typically work. And when it comes to single parents, it's always even harder. Mothers actually have the benefit of child welfare still sees them as the default caregiver.
Yeah.
But
well, child welfare and the courts to a more lesser extent.
Yes, and especially when they're younger, there is some truth to it. Now, there are plenty of mothers who have their difficulty with the child welfare system, but one of the problems is that what fathers do provide is not weighted the same way by CPS and the courts. Well, because unfortunately, I'm going to have to make a generalization here. So,
it's okay.
The mothers tend to be more of the nurturers. They tend to be more involved in the rearing of the children, whether that's biological or social, or what percentage. But that does still permeate in child welfare. But if the father is more of the breadwinner, or making more money and is helping support the family, if it's a one income household, or even in a dual income household, that financial contribution is valued less than the time that mom might be spending with the kid. So even if dad is doing a really good job, if you have to pick one, you're going to spend the one who spends more time with the child, because supervision is more important than the financial support, which you can just garnish from the breadwinner as the cash cow. And that really becomes a very serious problem, because it means that that whether you're talking about the mother or the father, we don't value the breadwinner, because what we're looking for when it comes to child safety, the breadwinner is an indirect source of safety, not a direct source of safety, because they're not supervising. They're not the one who is necessarily cooking the dinner every night, bringing the kids to and from school. And so when it comes to actually quantifying that, unfortunately, sometimes it can be lazy. But yeah, the breadwinner is not typically favored by CPS unless there is some circumstance that makes out the parent who has more child rearing responsibilities as truly unsafe.
So, yeah, okay. So is there some situations where whoever the breadwinner is, mother or father or whatever, that there are some situations where it is raised with welfare services that the caregiver, and that's where, because I don't want to differentiate between male and female, because I know some awesome dads who are caregivers, but not necessarily they get the child support because they're at home with the kids all the time, right? And they're a single parent. But is it that in some situations where the other parent, who's the breadwinner, wants access to the child, they will actually fabricate that the children are in an unsafe environment because the caregiver, for want of a better word, is unsafe, and therefore this is an in for them to be able to get more access to the children or 100% access to the children in that situation. Does that happen sometimes?
I've seen it. And a lot of that is the fault of the courts.
Okay.
A lot of people look at the court as this is the place where justice is done. The truth is, because it's all about who can make the better argument. So you're going to shoot for everything that you can get, because if you have to settle, at least you're in a better bargaining position.
Yeah.
And if you've ever been through divorce, you'll understand how this works. It's go for it all so that you can negotiate later if you have to. And the same goes for child welfare. You have Child Protective Services making its argument, and then you have to make your argument. And the truth is, families do not have the same, they don't have the same understanding of the mess that is the child welfare system on day one. I tend to describe CPS involvement as among the most frightening experiences any parent can endure. So if you think you're going to be in the right frame of mind when you can barely sleep, you're anxious, there's the possibility that you could lose your children.
I know, it'd be my worst nightmare. Would be my worst nightmare to lose my child. Or even be in a situation where Child Protective Services have come in, taken my child, and then I've got to prove that I am a stable parent to get my child back. That would be my worst nightmare.
Exactly. And the bureaucracy means you have to be doing the right services. And then you have to assume that everybody who is operating in this system is operating with good intentions. And the government is not good at holding the government accountable either. So that brings its own set of issues. Attorneys are extremely expensive. This is one of the reasons I started CPS Protect Consulting Services. Is I thought, what if you could make this a lot easier and a lot cheaper?
Yeah.
The way to level the playing field is you need an expert who doesn't have the same skin in the game that you do, who is going to be able to help you not make the mistakes that you might otherwise make on your own, and get through it successfully. There really is nothing like that in existence, and anything that really does have advocates is unfortunately funded by the same government that has these issues, and you could call it a conflict of interest. So it becomes very difficult to actually do this. If you're not a legal expert, an expert on the child welfare system, how are you supposed to know what you should answer and what you shouldn't? Whether you should turn them away when they show up or not. How do you know whether you should say this or not? Whether you should do what they say, or you should fight back, and when. And that's very, very difficult to do, even if you are in the right frame of mind. And I'll say this, if I were under investigation by Child Protective Services, I could not do it myself, because I would not be in the right frame of mind to do it.
No.
I would need somebody else. Even for someone like me, and studying the child welfare system is like studying the tax code. It goes on forever, and if you have learned everything there is to learn about it, you've wasted your life.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. So, and I completely agree with you in the fact that if I had Child Protection Services knocking on my door, I would be in a state of panic. My brain would not be thinking in the right way, and I wouldn't know where to start. So do you have So say, for example, right, Child Protection Services came knocking on my door. I think it's Child Welfare Services over here, but if they came knocking on my door, right, and said, oh, we need to do an assessment or whatever, right, and I then came to you, what would be one of the first things that you would tell me to do as such? Or how could you help me?
Well, I'm not as familiar with the laws in Australia. But if I'm talking Australia here, there are enough similarities that this should work. We actually have a free guide that can be downloaded from our website.
Right.
And we typically do this so that families do have the opportunity to reach out to us as early as possible and not have to wing any of this on their own. Because child welfare services, if you're talking about Australia, they are not technically law enforcement. They are social services providers. This has been a big argument in the United States for at least a decade now. Child welfare, it tends to piggyback off of of an arrangement they have with, of cooperation that they have with law enforcement. So if there is an issue, they can say, they can report this to the police, request their assistance, and there can be entrance under exigent circumstances. You can do a removal if it's if it is that kind of emergency, and then go to court the next day the court is open, if the court isn't open at the time. So you could do that before you even get a court order. But because if they're just coming based on allegations, if they're just coming to your door, they don't have anything. They can't really do anything unless they have a court order to compel you.
Right. So you don't have to let them in.
You don't have to, but if you don't, and they have a mandate to see, the kids and make sure that everybody's safe, and you just say flat out no, the first thing they're going to do is go and get a court order, and then you lose any discretion that you would otherwise have.
Right.
So
let them in.
Not that either. There is a third option, other than let them in or don't let them in. And what I tend to recommend, and this is what's in our free guide, is when they come to the door, don't let them in the home. Basically say that it's a bad time, and they'll probably say something along the lines of, well, we're required to, when we get a report, we have to make sure that the children are safe, and we have to do our job, and blah, 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 blah. And if you don't, then we have to go to court, and all this, all these other threats and whatnot. But what you can do is you can literally bring your kids, come to the front door. If the worker should be outside the door, and as long as you're inside, under your supervision, the worker can ask a few questions. They're obviously seeing the kids, that they're not in any immediate danger. And then you can just send the, after that, you can say, okay, so you can come back the next day or the day after, and we can do the full interview. What that does is it's not a long enough duration that child welfare services would have to go get a court order. You're still cooperating, and they've actually seen the kids. So they can at least document that within 24 hours they've made contact and they saw the kids and they didn't appear to be distressed and whatever. And that gives you the opportunity, without them asking all those other questions, to reach out to an attorney, reach out to, a consultant, like with CPS Protect Consulting Services. And we can make sure that we do a strategy call before they even get there, and then even be on the phone when they are there, and make sure that you preserve your rights and protect your family. On the front end, that's really important. Unfortunately, a lot of families don't actually get to us that quickly, so we have to meet them where they're at. A lot of times they may be in court, or they may be mid-investigation, and they're looking for something else, and we are able to work with them on that basis. But yeah, when they come, you want to make sure that that you're maintaining as much control of the situation as possible. So if you went and you just sent child welfare services away, well, I'm not letting you in. They're not going to be like, oh dear, well, I guess she's not working with us. So you know what? Let's just close the
Yeah, they're going to
case.
come back
Oh well,
harder, aren't they?
they're going to come back harder, and they're going to go get a court order if you
Wow.
do, if you don't comply. But if you're giving them just enough and you're giving yourself the time to develop your strategy, then you're putting yourself in a much better position. Because if they're coming, and usually the first visit is definitely unannounced because they don't want you preparing, this gives you the
Yeah.
opportunity to prepare. And this is something that families often don't do because they fear. This is why the threat of, well, we have to do this, and if you don't, I have to escalate the case, or I might have to take it to court, are so effective. It's when you are frightened, you don't want that case going to court. No, 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 no. I'm a good parent and I can show you.
Yeah. So, okay. So then what do you do once you've done the initial bring the children to the door, they're okay, right? How do you then prepare for the next stage, if there is even a next stage?
Well, what they're going to do is, of course, they're going to ask not just about the allegations. They're going to look for, they're going to do their background checks. They're going to they're going to come back. They're going to interview everybody in the household. They're going to ask for collateral contacts. They're potentially asking for, access to medical records. And it really depends on what they could potentially find. Every case is different. Every family's circumstances are different. There are some families where there are medical conditions or mental health conditions for the parents or the kids or both. There are some where there are housing concerns. There are some where, maybe they use corporal punishment. Maybe they spank their children. In the U.S., in every state except Delaware, it is legal to spank your kids as long as you are not leaving any marks or bruises. That would be excessive corporal punishment.
So excessive corporal punishment is wow. Now, would that be classed as a criminal? So if you left a mark on your child because you slapped them, right? And my child's never been hit by me, but so I don't particularly agree with it. And I think whether you leave a mark or not, if you're hitting your child, it's a traumatic experience. I was a 70s child, so I have been smacked. It didn't stop me from, I just didn't want to be smacked again, right? But it didn't really stop me from doing what I was doing. It stopped me at the time, but it didn't stop. Like I say, what is it? You beat the devil in or whatever if you smack a child. I don't know, whatever the saying is. So, but are they saying it's okay to hit your child if you don't leave a mark? But if you leave a mark, well, that's a criminal offense, or that's an offense.
The research is clear that there really aren't benefits to spanking. Now, there may be, in theory, and this is what I'll concede. There may be, in theory, an ideal sweet spot with the state of mind, the lecture, the frequency, and the severity, of a spanking that could be effective. But the ability to consistently have that state of mind and consistently hit at that same frequency, that same severity every single time is basically impossible for anyone to do and impossible for anyone to measure. So the research will never show that corporal punishment is effective in any way. And the idea that any parent actually could have that kind of control and consistency over years, multiple instances, is really impossible. So us being human, I would say that the research is right that spanking is more, you
more
could say
detrimental than effective.
Yeah, generally
Yeah.
speaking.
Yeah.
But the point here is there are many different circumstances under which child welfare services could find something, and depending on those circumstances and evaluating, that is, that will dictate exactly what the recommendations are.
Yeah.
Because the definition of child maltreatment, encompassing all kinds of abuse and neglect, is so expansive, and everything that child welfare services looks for, the condition of the home, the competency of the parents, supervision, all of this stuff, it means that no two cases are going to be exactly the same.
But how do you prepare for that as a parent?
The answer is there really is no way to be prepared in advance. In 2017, there was a 10-year longitudinal study that was published in the American Journal of Public Health. And they found that more than 1 in 3 children in the United States would be subject to CPS involvement.
1 in 3?
Before they hit the age of 18. Yeah, more than that. The exact figure was 37.4%. I remember in 2019, there were, according to the annual child maltreatment report put out by the federal agency in the U.S., there were 2.2 million reports made to child abuse hotlines in the United States.
Was that by kids, though?
And no, but 1.1 million of them were accepted for investigation, and there were over 400,000 children in foster care. I think it was about 453,000, if I remember correctly, at that time. So this is extremely prevalent. It happens without warning, and the smallest thing can turn into a very big issue.
Go on. Sorry, carry on. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, go ahead. It's okay.
No, so because I'm sitting here listening to you talk, and I know why you do what you do, because we've talked about it at length, right? But like, there might be some people who are listening to this who basically say, well, you're just defending the abusers, right? These people are abusing children, or these parents are abusing children, and you're going and helping out the families who are abusing their children to keep their children, right? So what do you say to those people, right? Because I know that's what you're not doing. You're not defending those abusers. Like, if children are being abused, something should happen.
My service doesn't actually prevent CPS Protect Consulting Services. We don't actually prevent child protective services or child welfare services from doing their job. So if they're not, there is no way to go, and even the best makeup is not going to hide marks and bruises. And, if there's evidence, that a child is being sexually abused, that's going to come up on a rape kit. If they really need to get a court order to get more information, they're going to get it. So if someone is really abusing their child, coming to CPS Protect Consulting Services isn't going to be effective. But the amount, so how, if you switch your child's school and they don't take your child, the old school doesn't take your child off the roster, and they're marking your child absent, and you live in one of the 27 states in Washington, D.C., that where educational neglect is a child welfare issue, guess what? You're getting a visit from CPS too. And then if they find something there, for example, maybe your home isn't navigable enough, or the battery in one of your smoke detectors was out, and there's a real safety concern, or it's something you've been trying to work with your landlord, you're renting your apartment or your flat, and you can't get them to fix it any faster, but CPS rules the issue as a safety concern. And if you can't just move, well, now the child is in immediate or impending danger of serious harm, and sorry, we got to take action. Or it's, I let my child walk home from school, and apparently that's a bad thing. There are a lot of cases where it is something small, or it's someone wants to, it could be an ex who's making frivolous allegations.
Yeah.
And the truth is, even if someone had done the wrong thing, and again, our services are not particularly effective, so I don't know why someone would pay for services that would not be effective in their case. But if even people who have done something wrong do deserve due process and do deserve a level playing field. It may not be the most glamorous thing to do to treat everybody equally, but if you do want an equal and just society, then unfortunately you have to work with people that you may not necessarily like or you may not necessarily agree with. And sometimes it could be something more nuanced. For example, someone who does lightly spank their children. I may not agree with it, but if the idea is that they need to be given a fair shot when child welfare comes to the door, and then whatever child welfare does, they do, then they still deserve the same fair shot that anybody else does. It's really hard to actually hold that standard because ideally you would only help people that you want to help.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, if you want to treat everybody equally, if you want to have a reasonably fair and just society, you can't pick and choose. And do you want to live in a society where someone who disagrees with your values gets to pick and choose against your values?
Yeah.
Because it works. It works when you're the one calling the shots. But what happens when someone that disagrees with you is the one calling the shots?
Exactly. No, I agree. And there are so many, like you said previously, every case is different, right? And there are so many cases where it can be an ex-partner who is just gone, well, I'm just going to mess your world up for a few months or years or whatever, and say that you're abusing your child. I've had several people in Australia who have been accused of abusing their child, as in sexually abusing their child, verbally abusing their child, or whatever, by their ex-partner. For whatever reason, I've never understand the reasoning, but for whatever reason that they've done it, and they find themselves in a situation where they're being investigated. And it's horrendous because they haven't done any of the things that they've been accused of, but they're now having to prove their innocence. So, you're the people that they would be going to say, hey, this is my situation. I don't know what to do. Where would I be? What's the best thing to do? You don't provide legal advice. So one of your first things would be speak to a lawyer if they can afford it or whatever, or get legal aid. But you do actually help because you understand the system. That's right, isn't it?
Yes. So the best way to look at us is we're strategy consultants, or in fact, the lead researcher in this area it refers to it as non-legal advocacy. And she's actually in Australia. She's a professor at RMIT in Australia. Yay. Her name is Kate Fitt. I actually came across a paper of hers that she published. What was it? This year. On non-legal advocacy. It was very good. She's involved in an organization called Fin Victoria. That's Finvic, finvic.org.au. I don't know a whole lot about the organization, but they do provide advocates and peer support. It's not the same as what we do, just because a lot of the parents have a different experience and not a lot of the inside information. It's the closest thing I can find to what we do in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
But it is nice to see that there is research being done. unfortunately, I don't know how independent it is. It's a not, it's a nonprofit, and it may be getting its funding from the government
or whatever.
but it's the closest thing that I can find to what we do at CPS Protect Consulting Services in the United States. Just the fact that there are things that are starting to pop up, I think is a really good sign, because one of the things when you're trying to change something with government is particularly slow. It's bureaucratic. You have special interests that might not want things to go the way that you want it to go. So one of the avenues that is most disruptive is innovation. It's about thinking, where haven't the regulators gotten to yet? Where are the highways, clear of the toll booths, so that you can create something that can be really helpful. That's one of the great things about CPS Protect Consulting Services in the United States, is the regulators haven't really gotten to something like this. So I can offer it nationwide, and it can cost less. And, I'm not at the mercy of losing my license because I'm doing something wrong. We have more freedom to be able to help families. A lot of times the attorneys are court officers, so they're bound by certain rules. They're also bound by the entities that license them. So whether that's the state or province that actually issues the licenses, you don't want your license revoked. So here, we have a lot more flexibility to work with families in ways that a lot of these heavily regulated areas just don't.
Wow. Yeah. So look, where can people actually get in contact with you if they find themselves in that situation, or even to download your free information? Because you've got free information as well, haven't you?
Yes. So we can be found on social media, on Facebook, Twitter, or X, or whatever it's called now, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And our best information is on our website at cpsprotect.com.
Okay.
We can also be reached by phone, toll free in the US, at 844-633-KIDS. And we can also be emailed directly at contact@cpsprotect.com.
Perfect. So if anyone's got any questions, or they find themselves in this situation, they can just basically get in contact with you for some advice, or download your free download, for want of a better word. Sorry, my brain's not working this Friday morning. And just get some extra help, pointers in the right direction.
Absolutely. And even if someone's from outside the United States, I've had some inquiries. Obviously, we're limited in what we can do outside the US, but if I'm aware of, if I or, any of our consultants are aware of any resources in other countries, we always do try and respond if we can.
No, that's great. That's awesome. And so, Jay, thanks so much for coming on here and actually speaking to us and having a conversation with us about such a frightening and scary subject, because it is there are times when I joke and I say, oh my gosh, I'll sell my son on eBay or whatever. That is a joke. All the people out there in welfare world. But to lose my son would be horrendous, and a horrendous thing to have happen. And I'm sure other parents as well, that would be a horrendous and scary situation for them to have to go through. It's stressful, it's scary. They're your child at the end of the day, and you love and care for them. So thank you for coming on board. Thank you for setting this up, at least as an alternative to what is out there, to help parents in this difficult situation. I do have one final question for you, though, and I'm interested to see what your answer is. I'm asking this to everyone because I want to build up some information as such regarding advice for people. What piece of advice has someone given you that you still use today?
This is a good one. So I remember I was preparing for brain surgery.
Oh my gosh.
And this was a couple of years ago, and the office manager called to check up on me as I was preparing. She did this in the weeks coming up to it, and it wasn't a big surgery, but yes, it dealt with the brain. And the way that she described it was, it's not open back surgery, it's just brain surgery. And it gave me, it's not so much advice, but more of a comment, but it put things into perspective in such a way that makes me look at risk and look at the world differently. Because the truth was, open back surgery is very risky. The possibility of the adverse event rates are much higher than what I was having happen. The chances that anything even minor would go wrong in my case was about 2%. So there's a 98% chance it was going to go right,
successful.
which means it was a fairly rudimentary procedure. We tend to think of the brain as this organ that is so crucial to our existence that any messing around in there is potential disaster. But it was just brain surgery. If anything, just because something looks scarier doesn't mean it is. And I have a client, I had a client recently. I was having a conversation with her, and it was whether the CPS investigator wanted to come one more time to close out the case, and technically they didn't have enough evidence. She didn't really, they'd already seen the home. She didn't really need to, but she's human, just like everybody else. And with the threat to escalate the case, she was letting her guard down a bit. Sometimes what we see isn't sometimes what we feel isn't necessarily what the real risk is. And even if you can't get past that difference, acknowledging that gap is a big deal.
Yes, no, it's just brain surgery. That's but I suppose it's looking at something and going, well, it could be worse. That's basically what you're saying. It's actually looking at it could be a worse situation.
Well, it more looks, sometimes it looks worse than it is because it feels worse, because the potential consequences, even if the chances of it are small, the idea that it could happen to you and that uncertainty truly is frightening.
Oh, yeah. I've had major surgery as well. And I know it is scary. It's scary, but it is, it's something you just have to quantify and go, the chances of it succeeding is like 98%. So you've got to hold on to the 98 and not the 2, basically. Jay, thank you so much for today. It's been a pleasure speaking to you again. Yes. Wish you all the best with the company and stuff and what you're doing for the kids and the parents out there. And hopefully we'll speak again soon.
Thank you, Claire. Likewise.
Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast and you would like to hear more, please hit subscribe wherever you like to hear podcasts. If you would like to support us further, share this episode with your friends and family. And finally, drop us a review on iTunes, as I'd love to hear your thoughts, comments, and ideas. It all helps me to understand and produce awesome content you want to hear just like this. If you want to check out our past episodes, write to us, appear on the podcast, or for links, resources, and show notes, go to our website www.strongsingleandhuman.com. We are also on all the usual social media platforms, Insta, Facey, and Twitter. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I hope to see you back here again soon. Be kind to yourself, and remember, no one is perfect. We're all just putting one foot in front of the other and doing our best. I'm Claire Martin, and you've been listening to the Strong, Single and Human podcast.